straight in, no kissing. Thank you very much for joining me today, Kyle. So today we are going to be discussing pain, rehab, performance, and no better man to speak to. And obviously, you're helping my missus build a big batty right now. You're a man of many talents. So Kyle, I want to ask you. You used to work in like a hands-on physio capacity with like back in Canada, right? How has your process for getting people from pain to performance evolved since kind of moving from that role onto like the online space?
Yeah, so I actually never worked in person as a physio in Canada. So I moved to the UK for physio, and I always thought I wanted to be a physio growing up. And then I worked in like high performance strength and conditioning, stuff like that. Worked with like some of the quote unquote best physios, and it was very symptom based. It's like we're not looking long term. We're just looking to make these symptoms better. Like if I can make these symptoms better, then the person I did my job. So right, yeah. And going through physio school in the UK, working around in like places in the UK, understanding that that's not really what makes someone better long term. Like the do in the session is important, but what the person does outside of the session is way more important for making a long term change. And understanding that for probably 95% of people who see a physio, we're not looking at making tissue level changes. We're looking at making really just nervous system coordination level changes. And going through a very clinical background, we're taught to focus on a diagnosis, and that diagnosis is usually structural, which is an incorrect assumption most of the time, in my opinion. Um, you can't assume that the structure is causing the symptom. Does
Mm.
that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I guess like anytime a client comes into the clinic initially, there's only so much help you can give them within that session. Or even if you are doing like something like telehealth, if you're just doing like one session, asking people questions, it's the exact same as if like I do a consultation with somebody who wants to gain muscle. Like whatever I tell them right there and then, it's not going to help them gain muscle right then, there and then, right? It's going to be the implementation of a program over a long period of time. But I guess like with pain, like there's the mental side of things too, right? Where people can be a little bit afraid of getting back into the movement and doing the things that did cause them pain initially. When somebody could maybe would have like one of those sessions, and even like now, when you do have somebody who comes to you and they're wants to work around some type of niggle, some type of injury, it's like I guess like the triaging process that you work towards in terms of like looking at the program, you look at the mechanics. How would that process look?
Yeah. So we start with obviously the history is the most important because if we understand the history of the symptoms, we can help explain to the client whatever they think in their head, the reason that these symptoms are occurring. That might be correct or not, but the more that they can understand what's actually going on, even if we do nothing, if they understand your back isn't fragile, you're not going to die if you bend over, their symptoms will get better right away. So pain is an output, right? So we have all of the input from the environment, information about where we are in space, information from muscle contraction, visual input, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have how the brain interprets that information. That's kind of like the modulation of all of the input, past experience, education level, all of these things, education that will dictate how someone experiences possibly the same amount of stimulus or the same input. And then the output might be pain, muscle contraction, stiffness, feelings, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so going through, okay, when did this happen? That's the biggest part. And then usually, okay, it happened 2 years ago. It's like, okay, you think you have a tissue injury, but it happened 2 years ago. Either one, why is this tissue not healing in 2 years?
Mm.
Or it's probably not the tissue injury that's still causing the symptoms, it's something else. And then they understand, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's like you live a normal person lifestyle, you're not an alcoholic, you don't do drugs, you probably have some sort of recovery capacity. This is probably not an in tissue injury we're dealing with. It's a residual movement thing, teaching the brain to understand these patterns as quote unquote safe. Pain can be described as like a check engine light on the dashboard,
Mhm.
right? If you're driving your car, you get a check engine light. It doesn't mean something's wrong. Sometimes you just take it to the mechanic, they plug in the OBD reader, and you clear the code, and then everything's fine, right? So that's
Mm.
kind of how pain works. And if we have an adequate history from someone, and then what is the trend of the pain or trend of whatever symptom it is, we can understand trend of the symptoms is extremely important. So understanding what makes it better, what makes it worse, when it gets bad, how long is it bad for, right? So if everything's kind of if it hurts and then we kind of warm up and it's better and then it gets worse after, that might be an actual like, tendon thing. That's kind of like the call it the warm up phenomenon. If it's related to, I think this is where a lot of physios fall short because we don't really learn about this. It's like, okay, how is your life stress? How is your nutrition? Is this related to sleep or stress or this? Like, I've had people where they just eat no food forever and they have chronic pain, and then I just get them to not eat 1,200 calories a day and their pain gets better. And we didn't really do any physio things. So understanding the trend and looking at the person as a whole, I think this is why one of the reasons why I won't really ever work in person unless I run my own thing and can do it my way. Especially like in the UK, I would have people come to me who are 120-kilo female, and they're like, "Oh, my knee hurts." Okay, cool. We can do things to make your knee better, but I mean, gravity still is pushing down on a 120-kilo, 5 foot one female. I think that's quite a big thing to address in terms of habits, lifestyle, et cetera, blood markers, health metrics. But as a normal quote unquote physio, you're not allowed to look into any of those things. So looking at the trend of the pain can understand it just gives us data in terms of where we need to go to make these things better. And then looking at lifestyle, if that includes what do we do? When do we wake up? Do we lift? How does lifting look? And then from the biomechanics standpoint, basically, do we have dissociation between joint segments? Meaning, can you move one bone without the other bone moving? Oh, if I'm doing a squat, I need my knee on my tibia to move relative to my femur to move relative to my pelvis. If we don't have that ability, we need to give someone that ability so that we don't have focal pressures on some place. Because really, if you think about how the body works from a let's say mechanics perspective, not like biomechanics, we just take the nervous system out of it. We're just really sacks of fluid, and then
Mm.
hard things and sacks of fluid, and need pressure to be equal and not a lot of pressure in one place. How I usually explain it is if you were to slap me in the back, like give me like a body glove, you would probably like you wouldn't be able to hurt me. It would hurt, but you wouldn't be able to like injure me. But if you were to take the same force and stab me in the back with a pen, you could probably puncture my lung. Same force, but over a focal area. Now we have more force going through one spot. This is when tissues might not be very happy. Blood flow gets restricted. So tissues are quote unquote unhealthy, et cetera, et cetera. If we have that over a long period of time, this is how these quote unquote chronic things develop. Most things are chronic, but we don't view them as chronic because we don't have any symptoms until we have symptoms. So they're like, oh, bent over and this happened. It's like, no, no, no. Like this has been happening for a very long time. We need to make sure it doesn't, we just went over the threshold and now we have symptoms. And then we bring them back under the threshold. They have less symptoms. And then we increase movement quality over time. And that's what keeps them hopefully pain free. So when I do a quote unquote physio assessment with someone, it's always an assessment plus 2 weeks of guidance. That guidance is when I give you a plan, can you do the plan properly? And we talk, you send videos, I critique technique, etc. Like we make sure that we're moving on the right track instead of just the normal, you go to a physio, they send you on your way after. And the most important part is the after part where you're doing the thing. So that's kind of how the process works. The biggest part is like educating the person of this is why I think this might be happening. This is your trajectory of how things are going to go. This is what we're going to do. This is what you're going to have to do to make these things better. And once they understand, people people freak out the most when they just don't understand things. And if you can make someone understand something in a very simple way, then they'll know what to do to make it better usually. Similar to like, I don't understand why the scale is going up every week. It's like, well, this is what calories are. This is what energy balance is. And then you explain it to them and they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, I just
Mm,
need to eat different. And then the scale won't go up every week.
yeah.
Kind of the same with pain, but it's everything is just a guess. And I tell people that. Like, this
Yeah.
is a guess. It's a very educated guess, and I'm pretty good at this, but we don't really know what's going to happen until we do something, and it'll either make it worse or better. But either way, that'll give us some feedback, and we'll know what to do next.
Yeah. If you do something wrong, at least that removes that option from the table. So you know to go in a different direction, right? Like I think one thing you mentioned there, um, being quite important is like, essentially like the straw that breaks the camel's back, so that like those symptoms or that like pain issue that pops up, like whether that's like, twinge your back in the gym or you get like a sharp pain in like, I don't know, your elbow or your neck or something like that, right? And like some of that could just be down to like movement quality over time and just, as you said, maybe outside the gym now, on that specific day, maybe your sleep is off, hydration's off, stress is higher, low tolerance is just a little bit lower that day. You go in, lift a bit heavier anyway, and all of a sudden the thing pops up. And I think when those things pop up, it is very easy to write it off as like just this random thing that happened. But I think a lot of people are probably ignorant to maybe some of the signs that these things could be coming along. That's definitely one thing I've noticed in my own training, like some of the recurrent things that pop up or usual aches and pains, and actually a little bit more thorough view of my mental capacity. I'm able to see, okay, like I can actually logically see why this would potentially be happening to me. What we say is some of the more common like injuries that you will see people come up with, and like what would also be some commonalities in regards to roots, I guess.
Yeah. So obviously, back, knee, shoulder are the big three. Back being sorry, let's say knee being the most simple in my opinion, because we weight bear on our legs. So if we think about these joints, we need movement between the joint segments. So if I have a knee issue, usually it could be for most people who actually lift, it's not like a tissue capacity issue, right? We're not coming back after injury. We don't need to build this capacity of the tissue. We already lift weights. We do leg press and pendulum and hack squat and hamstring curl and all these things all the time. So we need to make more movement between joint segments. So with a knee, can we change the shape of the foot? When I say change the shape, I mean, can we pronate and supinate our foot? Which means, can we move our shin? Do we have hip range of motion? If we can move through our hip, we can move our femur, then the joint in between can move nice and we don't have pressure where we don't want it. Quite quite simple when we think about it like that. But a lot of these, especially in the hypertrophy world, um, a lot of the hypertrophy first focused things will detract from quote unquote movement quality, right? So I think, for example, seated calf raise is bad for calves because it has less calf gains than straight leg calf raise. That's what people will say. The tibia moves best at 90 degrees of knee flexion. Your foot can move quite well when you're sitting in a chair, basically sitting in a chair doing calf raises. So seated calf raise, very good way to move the shin around and move the foot around and reinstate that knee movement that we don't have from the distal side. But because it's worse for hypertrophy, everyone just crosses it off the list. All right. Another one is if we don't have full foot pressure on something, we won't really have great movement through the lower limb. If we look at AJ, I always give this comparison. AJ lets his heels come off when he does leg press. And then everyone's like, I want to be like AJ. AJ's the coolest guy on the earth. AJ does it, so I can do it. And I'm like, yes, but you don't see that AJ is flawless on every other movement and actually has that movement capability, but then chooses to lift in a certain way to get more stimulus on a certain place. The problem arises is when someone doesn't have any movement capability and then says, I'm going to lift like AJ because I want to be jacked like AJ. And they run into issues because they're moving into places that they don't have, right? I want to have every option available, but then I choose certain options for more gains. But the problem is when we don't have any options available and then we have to move these in these patterns because we don't have any other options. And then that's when we run into issues. For back stuff, it's basically just, can you move through your hips? Can you move through your hips and control your center of mass? Controlling center of mass is very simple. Most people just lift on machines anyways, so it's very simple. We get hip movement, back stuff feels better. If it's unilateral, we usually have a unilateral issue. If it's bilateral, we usually have a bilateral issue in terms of symptoms. Shoulder stuff is a little bit more difficult because we need to move the ribs around, and moving ribs is very difficult relative to everything else, especially because we stare at a screen all the time. If you've heard of sleep apnea, where you hold your breath when you sleep and almost die, we have something called screen apnea, where when you are on a screen, you basically hold your breath. So if you have if anyone has like a watch, like some sort of smart watch, if you do like a check-in block, it'll say like you had a stressful period because you're basically holding your breath the entire time, which causes less ribcage movement. And then when we press and we row, we don't know how to press and row very well. We only do super stabilized things. We never put our arm overhead because these exercises are quote unquote worse for hypertrophy because they're less stable. And we slowly lose movement capability between upper body segments, which should have more movement because they're less structure, more function. And then we run into quote unquote shoulder issues. I think when you say like people are naive to this, it's like not a lot of the time it's not their fault. Especially I work with a lot of people or consult with a lot of people who have the same coach for a very long time. And it's like the same client and the same coach have been doing the same thing for so long. And to them, it looks good. And then you have another person look at it and it's like, oh, wow, this is so obvious. How did we not see this before? But it's not, it's just a different view of things that becomes very clear when we look at these things and we know what we're looking for, but it's extremely hard to understand what we're looking at in real time, especially because most of the fitness industry is not educated at looking at humans in person. They're educated looking at slides on a course that they buy online, which is very, very different. So I think that's the main thing. So the big three would be shoulder, back, and knee. Is it super complicated? Yes. Is it simple-ish if we understand what we're looking at? Most of the time.
Mm. Yeah, I think you brought up a good point there in regards to seeing either slides on the course or even just like you're just looking at people in 2D model. Like if you're reviewing training videos, for most part, you're just seeing people in one video unless you ask for multiple angles. And like, I guess like this is like one thing, especially when I'm like reviewing powerlifters training, right? Like if I'm looking at a squat and getting multiple angles, if I see there's maybe some type of like recurring issue popping up, um, obviously like there's just some oddity popping up with the likes of their actual progression on it. Like it's useful to get multiple angles just so you see is there like hip shift, is there like bar tilt, has the bar path looking, all these kind of things. Can they keep their heels down? You know, just these simple little changes, but like so much of that could be solved when you're actually seeing people in real time. Like when I worked in personal training, I was like, obviously one of the big benefits was that like I could see everything from pretty much like 360 degree view. And then when I went into online coaching, actually being able to review videos was had a little bit more insight as to how to actually review them properly versus just being like, okay, we need just need to get all these videos from like, you know, the plane in which you're moving within, right? The sagittal, frontal, transverse, whatever like that. Um One thing that I want to ask, because you're kind of mentioning in regards to some exercises being, you know, shunned because they are not as stable. And then you're also mentioning about like, yeah, a lot of people doing work on machines when it does come to muscle gain. You think Do you think that this can limit some people from, you know, longevity when it does come to training? Because obviously one of the biggest components of actually gaining muscle over time is just spending more time in gym, being able to do that for a long enough period of time. Do you think like maybe some of the overemphasis in these machines in the bodybuilding world could be a detriment to their long term capacity?
Not the machines per se, but I would say the way we approach things in terms of what we look for in terms of progression. So if you for let's take me for example. I feel good all the time. I pretty much never have any niggles. I don't really have an ego when I lift, but I lift in a very low rep range most of the time. But I make sure that I have that joint dissociation that I need. My technique is dialed 24/7, 365. But you take a newer lifter who doesn't have good technique and you only put them on machines so they don't have to have as much coordination gains to get hypertrophy, which is probably what you want as a newer person. You want someone to get gains faster, maybe. Um, but then I don't know, you see the trends online of like, oh, low reps are better than high reps, which are they better or worse? Probably you can talk about that for a long time. But this person only does low reps and they're beating the logbook every week, but the technique is not, we don't have the dissociation between these joint segments. We're not actually moving in a way that's going to give us more range of motion over time. And then eventually, if we don't use it, we lose it. Right. So the more load we have, the more pressure we have in order to move that load, which means the less dissociation between joint segments. And then eventually, over time, we run into these issues where the body's just like, I don't like moving in this position because I just don't do it ever. Right. So there's these exercises that we can put in that in a vacuum, they are quote unquote worse for hypertrophy, maybe. But over time, we're reinstating that function that we lose or function that we don't have so that we can continue forever to make gains. Right. Like I would say dips and pull-ups are dips are quite a very good example. If you can do a very good body weight dip, you there's a lot of stuff, a lot of coordination demands that are needed. And if we can get into a good position and move the ribs and have a posteriorly tilted scap to actually load tricep and chest, it's like when you get on the machine, it's going to be so much easier. So it kind of like the coordination gains from these quote unquote less optimal movements will stack when you get on machines, right? You'll see the people who they are super strong on the Smith, but then you give them dumbbell press and they're just terrible.
Mm,
That's like there's a very big disconnect here. It's like if I'm strong, if I can max out the dumbbell rack, imagine how easy it'll be when I go to a Smith. So kind of having those blocks of periodization where we do these movements that are quote unquote less ideal for hypertrophy, it's actually going to make long term things better.
yeah, I think it's really also a component of just like managing the entire load of the program. Considering, you know, if somebody gets extremely strong on machines, it can be very easy, especially if like movements are breaking down quite a bit, like on those like final few reps that are getting close to failure, that these niggles become a lot more likely. Whereas, and as well, the fact that like with machines, obviously, because you're on like guided path of motion, it's very easy to move a load without using the target muscle group. Like, you think about like a Smith machine press, like you mentioned there, it's very easy to, versus just push straight up, to push against the rack to get the weight moving. And like, while you're getting the rep, you're not necessarily achieving the actual goal of maybe kind of keeping the tension on target tissue. Whereas when you're getting towards the sticking point on a dumbbell press, you're just going to kind of fail. Your elbows will flare out massively to your shoulders, and like you'll just know the set is over. So I find it's like a lot harder to it's easier to cheat if you really want to cheat on maybe some free weight movements, but at the same time, if you're looking to keep the tension where you want it, I do find that obviously you're going to be using a lower overall load relative to what you maybe start to cheat and kind of trick yourself with on the likes of a machine.
That's why I think like having as a coach, having pictures and videos and stuff like that is very important because a machine that like we have like a similar stature. Like you're not super tall, are you? You're like
No, I'm like 177 cm.
yeah. So like we're pretty close in stature. Like machines that work for us. I have a guy prepping a guy who's like 6'6", or they're not going to work for him. So it's like understanding it's not just whatever brand machine. It's like, okay, how long is this person's limb length? Like, how do they press? Do they press with their triceps? Do they press with their chests? Like, do they press with their delts? And then understanding, like, if we're trying to build a physique and not just lift weights, like, it becomes a lot more important in terms of exercise selection wise. If we're talking about kit selection or cues that you're going to give someone, right? Like, I program for Emma and I program for George's girl, and she is a midget, and Emma has long ass legs. It's like very, very different when I'm giving cues to these two different humans, even though it's like the same machine.
Yeah. Like, I wonder then, like, how much do you focus on looking at somebody's mechanics? Like a client who's looking at a muscle, how much you pay attention to the mechanics first before you maybe look at how they move? Um, because yeah, I guess like I probably came in with the initial bias of just looking at how they move, but now obviously since learning a little bit more, I'm also thinking a little bit more about this person's mechanics. How should I be going about like setting up their loading or their exercise selection across the block? So I'm kind of curious how you do it.
Yeah. So it's basically like once we understand if we look at how long is femur, how long is shin, how long is forearm, how long is humerus, and then how long is someone's torso relative to their legs, we can kind of look at, and then maybe how is their rib cage orientation of like, do they have a narrow or a wider rib cage? I'm going to have more or less. If we think about like torso musculature, that's where it's going to affect it the most. Of a wider rib cage person, if you watch Nick Walker do a chest press, it's like very, very abducted, but his rib cage is so wide that he has a lot of medial to lateral pec. It's just like a super flat surface. But if you look at me, for example, I'm super narrow. I have more A to P distance of my pec. So I have to tuck my elbow quite a bit to actually stretch the tissue and put tension across where I want. So that's something that could um, very much dictate how we perform movements. Or, for example, for working lats, driving your elbow to your hip for someone who's very, very wide or has big lats is sometimes a bad cue because there's not a ton of A to P distance of this person's lat. There's medial lateral distance. If they have a big lat, then their lat's just going to get in the way if we're driving your elbow to your hip. So it might look a little bit different, but we just need to understand that this is how this person works lats. Like one of my training partners is a classic physique pro, and he has like the biggest back ever, and his elbow is like a foot off his body when he drives his elbow down for lats. are just so big and that's his structure. So looking at that and then looking at, okay, I think this will go in this certain way. Then we look at the movement quality and see how it is. Does that match up? Yes or no? Or do we need to give a cue, different exercise, etc.? So it can give us clues on like how someone's going to move, but looking at how they move eventually and like what they're feeling is quite important. I think that's a lost thing of how does everyone sends me videos and just like, how does this look? And I was like, I don't know. How does it feel? Do you feel your chest working? Because sensation is a thing. It's very important. So especially on things that are more short and focus, like if you just don't feel the muscle, you're probably not doing what you want it to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who try and exercise, they have an intuitive feeling, even if they've never really done it before, as to what feels correct. Like if that muscle feels like it is somewhat contracting. So yeah, definitely asking people how the exercise feels is a big one that like a lot of people will send over training videos and before even like ask anything, it'll just be that, versus giving them a cue based off what I see and what I assume. Because yeah, you can't understand somebody's experience unless they kind of give you their own feedback alongside that. Um, uh, there was something else here. So I guess like with on that, okay. So when you are approaching maybe their feedback, right, and they kind of give you some ideas to how it feels, and maybe say for example they are doing that like lat pull down, and they're driving it elbow to hip, but that's not the cue that they need. How do you approach like cueing versus over queuing, right? Because I think that's also an issue, right? Like people give like somebody who wants to build their apps 4 or 5 different cues. How do you stumble upon what's the most effective one?
For me, because I deal with a lot of coaches, I tell people like in the first 2 weeks, I'm gonna over cue the fuck out of you. And then it's gonna get a lot better, and then we're gonna go from there. For more of like a more gen pop person, if there's cues, say they send me 10 videos and there's cues on all 10, I might just give them cues on 5 because it's just too much. And I'm gonna make the simplest cue that they can see on the video. So for example, like a lat pull down, a big cue that I give is like slide back so your knee is under the pad. So it's a very objective thing is like, did they do it right? Is their knee under the pad next time they send it or not? So I think that's something that, like not just a cue, like do this, but some sort of objective thing where when they watch the video back, they can kind of self correct or like with the press, if I go down too far, my elbow is going to like track towards the body, which is really just like a scat that's dumping over. Do I want that? Probably not. It's like, I want you to cut the range at your chin height. It's like more is not better. Better is better. You don't have to get full range for you because you have these limb lengths is stop here. And then they have an objective marker of I stop when bar is at chin. Did bar go farther than chin? Yes. Okay, bad. So it's quite giving something an objective marker cue is kind of usually my style because obviously online things they need to be able to kind of self-regulate that of I don't know, tricep extension, crossover tricep extension. I was like, I need the cable and your humerus to be parallel. Flare your elbows a little bit or put the cable down. I need this and this to be in the same line. And then they have an objective cue, and then they can kind of do that a little bit better. I think that's the way. And then once they can kind of self-regulate that, they understand how it's supposed to feel and how it's supposed to look. And then long term, they can do it the way we should do it for a longer period of time.
And when you are kind of giving some of the kind of cues, like will you have a bias towards maybe internal, external cueing when it does come to getting people to do essentially what you want them to do?
Um, Sometimes if I have to give an internal cue, a lot of the times the person doesn't have the correct range of motion, which usually doesn't happen because that's like a programming thing, and I usually don't fuck it. But if I did fuck it, I'll be like, hey, I want you to do this exercise before this exercise, or I'm going to switch your preps up. If it's like sometimes I see something, I'm like, there's no cue I can possibly give that will make this person better because they just don't have the range of motion. And we can try to. It's like the PT trying to teach their client first session to barbell back squat. It's like this is going to get better extremely slowly, and it's just a waste of time. If I regress the pattern or give them something to give them more range of motion or change exercise order, I'm going to have to give them no cues and it's going to get a lot better. So usually I would focus on objective external cues, um, but internal cues in terms of like feel, try to feel more foot pressure here in your warm up. Like I don't want someone to think about cues in their working sets because working sets should be autonomous, right? You don't think about it, you just lift the weight. And I think that's where over cueing can be quite an issue. I have a lot of clients that are into the very into the biomechanics that don't have the biomechanics knowledge, so they're just over analyzing everything. And I'm like, just think. I literally said to the guy the other day, I was like, just think less. I was like, just go lift the bar, put your feet in a position that feels good, and then hinge. And he's like, oh, it feels so good now. I was like, yeah, just stop thinking, just do it. It's like you don't need my approval, just go do the exercise. So I think it's like a bell curve of cueing where we don't want someone to think about cues while they're doing an exercise. And that's why sometimes I overload people at the start. So I'm like, are we going to get crazy gains in week one? Probably not. And will I sacrifice some gains in week one to make sure movement quality is good so that in week 7 we can move perfectly and now we just have a long runway of progression? Yes.
Yeah, the keeping the cues to the warm ups is a super important one. Like, because most of the time when we're working with these higher loads, like, and the heavy weights, especially in powerlifters, I know, like, who be working close to their one or max, doing doubles, triples, singles coming up to competition, like the amount of time they have to think within those sets is minimal, and you don't want them to think at all because they'll overthink it and they'll fuck it up, especially if they're coming into it with a million different cues. But even on those, if you're training for muscle gain, right, and you're in that like final 1 to 2 reps, you just want to be thinking about like keeping your intent within the set and like even just focusing on breathing, if anything, right? Because yeah, it's so easy to start overthinking it, and then all of a sudden, once you start thinking about one cue too much, it shifts your focus away from other aspects of the lift, which, as I said, should be automatic. At that point, it should just be like one fluid motion without having really any thinking involved. Um, you were kind of mentioning in regards to if internal queuing, if it's an internal queuing issue, it's been like a programming issue. And you kind of mentioned about like regressing and backscaling movements. So I guess like from what I pick up on that is that when you are initially trying to like get people to gain mobility, gain strength, in particular range of motion, versus saying I want you to do a pendulum squat at the gate, but they maybe don't have like the prerequisite range of motion to get in a good level of depth, whether it's ankle mobility, hips, whatever it may be. You were thinking about backscaling that all the way back to maybe something unilateral, for example, or how would that process?
Yeah. So the key to this, in my opinion, is to make it feel the least boring that it can possibly feel. So I want you to do the same exercises that you would normally do, just in a different order, right? So say that you have knee pain, maybe normal program, you go into the gym, pendulum squat would be quite close to the start. Say that we still want to do pendulum squat, but if we did pendulum squat at the start, we don't have the range of motion and we get knee symptoms. It's like, okay, cool. We're gonna do a lot of other things in a different order in order to get that range of motion. And then we're going to try that near the end. And then slowly, as their range of motion increases, the pendulum squat moves up the order until it's closer to the start. So we need to move the shin and the foot. Maybe we do some warm up stuff. You do seated calf raise first. Then maybe you do hip abduction or adduction to get more range of motion in the hips. Then we do some sort of hamstring curl, maybe a pause in the short. Medial hamstring will change the shape of the pelvis. Now we get more hip range of motion. I don't usually go to unilateral things unless it's like a B sense RDL, and this is why. I think unilateral things are overprescribed because we don't understand that in order to get true hip extension, we need some very good hip range of motion. So if I take someone with bad hip range of motion and give them a split squat, as soon as they put their leg behind their body, they will extend at the pelvis. They won't extend at the hip, which means I'm not getting the range of motion that they need. So I would always usually do bilateral things before unilateral things, unless the unilateral things are something in which doesn't suggest true hip extension. Single leg press, B stance RDL, in which your opposite knee is beside your working knee. So if we do B stance RDL, a lot of people put their back foot like way far back. They don't have that hip extension range of motion, then they'll just extend through the spine. But if I say, okay, I want both knees to be beside each other, but you're just hinging on one leg, now we can get that range of motion. Now we go into our main lift that causes symptoms closer to the end of the workout, and we have that range of motion given to us through exercise order. Still are training to failure. We're still doing all the things that we need to. Do you still need to do adductors and calves and hamstrings? Yes. So we're getting all of that hypertrophy stimulus, but just the exercise order is giving us enough range of motion to do the other exercises well, instead of putting the things that we care about more at the start and we just do them shitty, and then our knee hurts and we're thinking about that, and then the rest of the exercise aren't as good, and then we're just decreasing gains through every exercise. So that's kind of how I go about it. Of the workout I give someone might look the exact same in terms of exercises, but the rep ranges will be higher, the cues will be different, the order will be different, and they'll say like, "Oh, like I can't pendulum squat. I told you that." I was like, "Trust me, you can. Just do this in this order, and then try." And then they'll do it, and they'll be like, "Oh, it felt so much better." Right? Because every exercise is giving range of motion for the subsequent exercise. Right? If I can't move my shin, I can't bend my knee, which means my pelvis will move when I do hamstring curl. If I can move my shin more in open chain, now I can do a hamstring curl. Now I can use my medial hamstring to change the shape of my pelvis. Now I can move through my hip. Now we go to hip things, and then we go to a squat pattern, and then it's less shit. So thinking about that's usually my thing is like I don't want you to do a bunch of boring stuff because the boring low load stuff, especially with strong people, is so far away from what they're actually doing that it's going to take forever or it's not going to make a change. Right? Laying on ground doing breathing exercise is so far away from 3-plate Smith press that it's never going to it's never going to get there. We need something to bridge the gap, and that bridging the gap is the other upper body exercises that we do is going to allow us to make those changes under load. Right? This is why I don't think any in-person trainer, unless they're like a rehab specialist, should do table tests. Right? Like I have clients sending me table tests. I was like, okay, so this person paid you $100 an hour and you spent 30 minutes doing these tests in which you don't even understand them, and you're sending them to me to give you feedback on what to do with your client when they're so far away from what they actually need to do. Sure, we get this person external rotation lying on the ground, but as soon as they stand up, there's different gravity demand. Is this going to translate over? Probably not. So that's kind of how I go about that. If someone has an issue or lack of range of motion somewhere, we use exercise order and exercise cueing to just give them the range of motion they need by the time they need it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because, like, ultimately, at the end, I think one of the reasons why people don't do mobility work, like I'd be one of them. I don't do mobility work. The reason I don't do it is because it's fucking boring. But if I could do something different in my training that will feel like training, that I also feel like it's giving me another benefit other than just like gaining maybe more access to different ranges of motion, then I'm going to do that. It's going to be a lot more enjoyable. And as well, I think keeping in mind that, like, unless you are maybe the online coach who has plenty of time to spend in the gym, but if like you're a normal everyday person and you have an hour in the gym, how much of that time do you want to spend doing some type of mobility drill so you could do an exercise? Probably not much. You probably want to spend the majority of that time gaining the adaptation, because like the work, the mobility work, that's just getting you in a position to start the training process and get the adaptation. So if like 15 minutes is taken up of your training session, oh, like that's yeah, we're starting off on the wrong foot here.
It's like the the time eventually when you're a coach or a clinician, you understand that you're not in the market of getting people results. You're in the market of getting people results faster than anyone else can get them results. Rehab, and I found out this when I started my service, rehab is not a long term play in terms of business, especially if you're good at it, right? I had a bunch of people when I taught for Prescript. I was going through physio school, doing all these things. They were like, "Oh, do you coach? Do you do these things?" And I was like, "Ah, like yeah, online coaching. I don't know." And then I finally opened up online coaching spots, and I had like 20 clients in like a week and a half. And then after 6 to 8 weeks, pretty much 15 of those left. And what did they say? They said, "Going back to my real coach." I was like, "Whoa, I can help you with the fun stuff." But all my marketing was I was the pain guy and I was pretty good at it. So these people were like, "Oh, I'm not in pain anymore. I can just go back to my old coach." And then I just had clients. I was like, "Oh, like this isn't really a long term business play." And so many people online are like, "Oh, I want to be a rehab specialist." I was like, "Why do you want to be a rehab specialist? It's the worst job because you're just going to have to, if you get, the better you get at it, the more you're just going to have to search for clients. It just doesn't
Yeah,
make sense."
yeah. I guess like there are a number of people out there who probably make their business off leading people to believe that they maybe need to come in for their bi-weekly adjustment or their bi-weekly rub down or whatever like that, which is obviously, not too ethical, especially if they're putting people in the mindset that like they have this persistent issue that needs sorting out or needs, to be sorted out with my magical hands. I'm sure you've had your fair share of people come to you who have had those type of experiences. I'd be curious to know, like, how do you go about, I guess, like, kind of breaking down some beliefs that people will have instilled in them from, like, maybe like a previous a clinician they worked with?
Yeah. So I'm a very logical person. I talk like I ask a lot of questions and I really make people think. And the key with someone who comes in and has had X amount of treatments from X amount of professionals, I need to make them understand that there's a missing gap clearly, or they wouldn't be here. So I'm like, okay, what did you do with this person? What made it better? What made it worse? And then I get as much info as I can. And then I explain, like, okay, these things that you did, they're not incorrect. And this is how kind of things work long term. This is the missing piece that I think. This is what I think your trajectory would be. This is what I think we should try. So getting them to understand that there's a missing piece instead of telling them there's a missing piece, especially because a lot of people who go to these, there's a reason why people come back to their chiro or physio. It's because they're good people. They might be terrible clinicians, but they're very good people. And people are like, "Oh, my chiro's the best." I'm like, "Yeah, he's the best guy." But like, you wouldn't keep going to him if you didn't have symptoms. So I can't be like, "Oh, your fiance, she's the worst," because you immediately get defensive, right? So you need to make these people understand that there's nothing wrong with the clinician and there's nothing, no one does anything wrong, but there's gaps in their rehab or gaps in what they should be doing, or else they clearly wouldn't be talking to someone else, right? You don't search somewhere else if have everything you need. So that's kind of how I go about it, of getting as much info as possible. Like, okay, you did this, like, oh, you're going to get a cortisone shot. Like, okay, do you know what that does? Do you know how long it's going to last? Then I explain everything of like, okay, cool. This will help with this and this, but it's not the full picture because this and this. And then they understand eventually, like, oh, okay, cool. I don't say anything bad about anyone else, but I make them think and make them understand, like, okay, like, so your symptoms come back every 5 days after you see your chiro, and then every 7 days you just go see him again. Like, why do you think these changes aren't like? Why do you think your rib goes out every 5 days? Ribs don't really go out, I don't think, but there's people, what people will say. And then when I ask them a question that they've never thought about in their life, now they actually have to think. And then as soon as I have, you'll see on their face, like, oh, like, then they're like, oh, what do you think? And as soon as they ask me what I think, then I got them. then it's like, all right, you've asked me my opinion. Now I can give it to you. But you have to get the person to the point of trusting you enough to ask for your opinion first, even if they're paying you to be on a call or train them or coach them, whatever. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like be diplomatic with things enough, and then eventually they'll be like, okay, like, what do you think? I'm like, all right, cool. Now I'll tell you what I think.
Mm. Yeah. It's almost like a motivational interviewing type of approach where,
There's
yeah.
a lot of pain stuff, a lot of, especially like what we do. You probably have some clients where like they just do everything you say, they get their result.
Mm.
But you have a lot of clients where like they're paying you, and then you have to convince them to do the things that they're paying you to do.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a lot of motivational psychology of like getting these people to do these things, which is in rehab it's even harder because things are more boring,
Mm.
right? If it's fat loss, it's like, oh, someone gets a dopamine rush when they see the scale go down, which is motivation. But for rehab stuff, it's like, hey, do this boring stuff and like you're not going to feel a big difference, but like trust me, it'll be a difference. And like they're just putting their trust in you. They don't feel a difference until like X amount of time away. Like that's a little bit more difficult. So getting people buy in is the most important. Like I get the best rehab plan, you got the best fat loss muscle gain plan, but no one does it, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the expectation effect is huge, and it's obviously very pronounced in like pain management and like rehab because yeah, if like you're doing something, well, if you're doing something you don't feel as if like it is going to lead to results, like it's also going to affect like your implementation of that thing too. You know, like you could like even if it comes to down to just gaining muscle, right? If you don't think the plan on paper is going to work, like you're going to come into your session, you're going to sandbag it, you're not going to like take it too seriously. And outside the gym, everything else is going to reflect that too. You know, and I think maybe some of that could also be down to why like maybe some of the more traditional approaches. Like I've had a number of friends play rugby and stuff like that. And like they've always getting like injuries popping up, and you know they don't follow true on their rehab for whatever reasons. But I'm sure some of it is just because the thing they're doing is boring. They don't really think it's going to work. That's obviously gonna like build in that expectation, and yeah, it's a really good way of going about it though. Like I like how you mentioned that like you won't attack the person and you know the person they're coming from, because I think that's definitely an area where people will get defensive in regards to like, even if they think what they have been given is incorrect, they will get combative because they also then see that as like their decision was to go to that person initially and they stayed that person for X amount of period. So people can look it down and then that obviously blocks them off from help whatsoever. And regardless of what you say, it's not going to be taken as helpful because you come at it straight away from a negative point of view.
Yeah, a lot of it with rehab stuff, it's like a monetary thing. So like I've had people where like I've spent 15 grand on rehab, and then like I give them something that's different than what they've done, and they get results like quite quickly, and they're like, I tell them like, hey, like you didn't waste 15 grand on rehab, but like maybe you did if it's not working. So like with the monetary thing of like, or like someone had a coach for a long time and they didn't get good results. Most coaches are like actually pretty good these days, but like I've had people be like, oh, I've worked with this person for X amount of time and I didn't get any results. I'm like, okay. And then like they've spent all this money and time and it's kind of like a quote unquote waste. So they feel bad about it. So you can't have that person. If right away I came at someone, I was like, okay, everything, all your other clinicians gave you was shit. They're just going to be defensive right away because I basically told them, hey, you wasted your time and money and you're in the same place and it's your fault. And no one wants to hear that because it's not their fault. Like they trust everyone. Like no one wants to not help someone, hopefully. So yeah, I think that's a big thing with the rehab thing. It's like it's just such a monetary commitment and a time commitment. When it comes to like actual sports, so like someone going to the gym or like a normal person, things should kind of we should be able to just do the same things over and over. And if we do them a certain way, we'll be fine. But when it comes to actual sports, it's so out of control that you need someone to make changes on the fly and need to keep up with these things. So it's like, hey, I don't know, I play basketball and maybe I'm this person and I play 38 minutes a game. But some people play basketball, they play 10 minutes a game. It's like that's quite different. Or it's like, oh, like we went into double time, triple time. Like we had to play this many more minutes. It's like in an uncontrolled contact sport, like we can't control everything. Like, then people look at like, oh, why'd this rehab stuff happen? I was like, because you played 2 games in one game and you play a contact sport. Like you can't stop these things from happening. We just have to deal with them the best, especially like sports are the most like actual sports where like team sports usually they're the most uncontrolled environment. Like you'll see the physios online be like, oh, like I could have stopped this football player from exploding his Achilles when he stepped off the sideline. I was like, no, you couldn't have. Like, are you gonna ultrasound his Achilles every 5 minutes? You have no idea. So it's like with actual sports, it needs that's where like you need to work with someone, be employed by a team and work with someone and like see them all the time to know how to modulate things very fast. But with a quote unquote normal person, like just a gym goer, everything is controlled. The gym is the most controlled place ever. There's no injuries really that occur in the gym. Everything can be mitigated because it's a controlled environment.
Mm, yeah, like so many of the injuries that might pop up in the gym is like usually as a result of ego lifting or maybe dropping a dumbbell on your foot. you know, uh, I I feel so lucky that like I played rugby for like over 10 years and I got like no injuries other than I got a stud to the face, so I broke my nose and it split open. But yeah, to walk away with like no knee issues, no shoulder issues, no broken bones, other than those, bit of a win. So yeah, thankfully didn't have to experience the rehab side.
It's literally just luck at this point. Like
Absolutely.
taking a puck to the face. I have no tooth here, and it's like you can't control this. Yeah, it was when I was like a little kid, I got a stick to the face and it broke my tooth. And then I
Yeah,
had a fake tooth for a long time, and then it just kind of like fell out, and I didn't get it fixed yet.
yeah. There you go. Yeah, so we both have had essentially implements of the sport hit us in the face and disfigure us. When I split my nose open, right? So I slipped a tackle, and the cleat went straight up to my nose, and it split it wide open. And it was my first match playing for this team, and I came off the pitch. And I goes to my coach, my nose is broken. It's fucking pulsing blood. And he just goes, go into the shed and throw some water on it. And that was it. Just throw some water on it.
And some of these injuries, when you're like, you don't even know that they occurred. Like I split my head open like this much, and I was bleeding everywhere. I had no idea, and everyone was just screaming at me. And then I just looked down, there's blood everywhere. I was like, oh shoot,
Head
maybe
wound, they bleed.
maybe something's wrong. Got a bunch of staples and just continued your life.
How old were you when that happened?
I was in grade 11.
Yeah. When you're a kid, like you could definitely tolerate a lot of that stuff. Well, I think what happens when you're older, you're like, oh, more worried.
I feel like you just have more responsibility. I feel like people just think their body breaks down. This is what comes back to like the education part of like and the understanding of like pain and injury. Like for me, obviously, like I'm so educated, I understand these things. If I have a niggle, I'm never gonna freak out and say like, oh, this might be this, right? I have a niggle in my knee. I'm never like, oh, I blew my MCL out. I was like, oh, no, no, I'm on a leg press. It's gonna be fine.
Mm,
But then like clients or like regular people, they'll have one knee pain. They're like, oh, mine, I need an MRI.
yeah.
Like I actually had a guy, coached him in person, and he was a vet surgeon, like big baller guy, and he had some knee pain, and he canceled his session, and then he came in the next session. He's like, "Oh, I paid for a private MRI because I had knee pain." I was like, "Oh, why did you do that?" I was like, "What did it say?" He's like, "Oh, it said nothing." I was like, "All right, cool. Like, let's do these things." And like by the end of the session, he had no knee pain. He was like,
Mm.
"Oh, he like thought I was a genius," and I'm like, "Dude, you like saved a bunch of puppies today because you're a vet surgeon. I like you're the see, normal people like they're just not educated about these things, so they just think like the body is just breaking down if they feel something.
Mm, yeah. Like, I'm obviously nowhere near as educated as you with this stuff. I've only learned what I've learned in my own study. But I one thing that I guess has given me some uh credence, I guess you'd say, is like just experiencing it myself and working through pain symptoms, working through slight niggles, tweaks, injuries, whatever way you want to put it, and just seeing how they do resolve. Like a couple of years back, it was when I just started powerlifting. I had like a back tweak pop up, and I think it was really just a result of I came back into hard training after a competition too quickly. Um, it could have been that, and that back pain lasted for maybe 8 to 10 to 12 weeks. Like picking a bar off the floor, doing deadlift, doing squat was like just agony. But it was my own issue that I lasted that long because I just kept poking and prodding it. I kept trying to see could I do it without any other type of regression. And obviously during that like time was when I wanted to learn a little bit more about how I could overcome these things a little bit quicker. So that now that same issue's popped up maybe a handful of times over the years. Every time it pops up, I know how to address it and like you get a little bit better at like managing that actual pain experience. Versus the start, I was like, I'm done for. I can't go back to powerlifting. It's like my lower body's gonna shrink.
Yeah. I think it's so beneficial with clients too, like being able to speak from experience. It's like obviously the piece of paper I have on my wall at my parents' house that I haven't even seen gives me a little bit of credibility, but speaking to these things and going through them, it's like, oh, don't worry, like I've dealt with this before, like we can get through this already. So that like just gives you so much more. It's just so much more ease for your clients if when they experience the same thing of like, okay, don't worry, I know what's going on. I've dealt with this before, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a. I feel like the new rehab crowd hasn't done anything, so it's like they don't have any experience to speak of because they've just learned off online courses how to rehab someone. And it's like, okay, like it's very different if you've gone through these things and experienced them and be able to speak from your own experience is like quite a big thing. So
Yeah, absolutely. I like it's obviously unfortunate if you have had to go through a pain experience to get that experience, of course, right? But like, you look at it from the context of somebody wants to gain muscle or somebody wants to get lean, somebody wants to improve their nutrition, like you can find all that information online and like, somebody could have all the information in the world, but if they never walked that walk, they've never had that experience of like getting to that place where the client wants to be. It's very difficult to like even build like that connection when you're like even doing something like a check-in, you're communicating with your client because you're like, I think this is about that. I think this is how it works. This is what the book told me. But yeah, like the little bits of tacit information you pick up along the way, they are kind of like sometimes what gives somebody a little bit more, you know, uh, relief in regards to the stress they may be feeling around the actual experience itself.
especially with a lot of these things, they're so subjective and there's no clear answer on what's going to happen and what you're going to feel. Like you just need to go through it, especially with like you touched on like peptides earlier. It's like you have no idea what's going to happen. Is there really human research? Probably not. So it's like unless you've tried this thing, you don't really know how it's going to work. So there's a lot of people pushing these things. I'm like, have you tried all these things? Like, how do they work for you? Like, what
Yeah.
does it feel?
Yeah, I guess that kind of brings us on to that. So, like, talk about some band-aids that you see people using to work, help them recover, work through an injury. So I guess like, what are some of the ones that maybe come to your mind or kind of maybe annoy you a little bit more now?
Um, I mean the peptide thing is so interesting because now it's like it used to be like I have pain here. What stretch do I do to make it better? And now it's like as soon as someone has an issue, they're like, should I get PPC 157? Should I get peptides? And I was like, okay, do you understand how they work? do you actually have a tissue injury? You just had a niggle in your knee. Like, will this placebo help you? Probably. Do you have unlimited money and you're going to just inject these things that you don't really know what they do? Sure, go ahead. But that's the biggest one of like right away. It's like, I have this pain. Do I need peptides? It's like, okay, well, it didn't happen for no reason. It's like, oh, I have a scrape. I need a Band-Aid. It's like, okay, did the lack of Band-Aid before cause your scrape? Then having a Band-Aid was not the solution to the issue. It just doesn't make any sense. Can these things help? 100%. Um, like I've used these things with my clients. I've tried them on myself in test scenarios just to see how they work. Do they work? Yes. Are they the first line of defense? Probably not. These things don't just happen for no reason, right? If I like my friend got hit by a bike here in Thailand, and he is like the biggest bruise on his ribs I've ever seen. And I understand tissue healing times, and like these tissues should heal in this amount of time. These tissues should heal in this amount of time. And he just crushed peptides like crazy. And in like 3 days, the wound was pretty much gone. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like these things probably do something. But the problem with when we talk about like the BPC 157 TB 500, if we have a tissue injury, it will allow the tissue to potentially heal faster. Healing and remodeling, this is probably the most important thing I'll say on this podcast for people who take these things. Healing and remodeling are not the same. So you'll see all these big enhanced guys, they'll tear their pec and then they'll take a bunch of peptides and it'll feel better because now we have the raw materials to make this tissue again. But what remodels the tissue into a strong tissue is load. So people go, oh, I feel great. Put a bunch of plates on the Smith, and then they hurt their pec again. So it's like if I'm rebuilding a bridge, the peptide will just get all the raw materials for the bridge and just put them in a pile. But that doesn't mean the bridge is ready for someone to walk over. We need something to remodel that in X amount of time so that this tissue is now strong enough to handle the loads that it did before, which is what people don't understand. It will help with healing, but healing and remodeling are not the same. And if the tissue is not remodeled to the extent that it needs to be to handle the load, this is when the repeat injuries occur from these things. I don't care how you feel. Are you ultrasounding your tissue to make sure that it's in a good spot? Probably not, because no one has a portable ultrasound machine. That is one of the investments I'm going to have before I have a child. It's going to be very interesting. Super waste of money, but it's going to be super cool. But yeah, so remodeling and healing, not the same. Even if we take these things, we still need to do some sort of graded exposure rehabby things to get the tissue to remodel the way we want before we can go back to 100% doing what we need to do.
And you also need to ensure that the things that led to it happening in the first place aren't like resolved. Because I think that's probably I think that's the danger. Well, not just these, but just like anything that is like a supplement or claims to be like a miracle cure for anything, is that it's going to be the first thing for lazy people to try, right? Because they want to just take a pill, they want to do an injection without having to change habits or behaviors, because changing that is hard. Like, say for example, if it is an injury that comes up as a result of ego lifting, but if the ego lifting persists, no matter how much peptides you jam into your knee or your shoulder or whatever like that, it's going to pop up again, you know? So, like that's why I guess you said it is kind of a Band-Aid versus a long-term solution, just kind of like any medication. Like most medications, they're not taken for a chronic health issue. are going to be short lived and phase out.
Yeah. So it's like, unless there's an acute thing that something happened, you get in a car accident, it's like, yeah, take all these things. You're lying in a hospital bed, you'll heal faster, 100%. It's like most of the stuff that most of these things that are accelerants, I talk about them like they're they work exponentially, right? So if I'm taking, I don't know, a fat loss drug, to 0 times something is still 0, but a lot times something is a lot. So if like you are dialed in on your diet and you're dialed in on your training and your eating is good, and then you take this thing, it's like, oh wow, results are going to be crazy because we're actually it's a multiplier of something. It's like, oh, you're on your rehab, your training is good, you're doing these things, you're doing the right technique, you're not ego lifting. Now you take these peptides, now you're going to heal faster and things are actually going to be accelerated instead of kind of masking things and we don't get what we want out of them. Everything is kind of like a multiplier.
Yeah, and I must also put in disclaimer that I do not recommend the use of any substances. Oh, they're not illegal right now. They're just like, a lot of them are like sold as research chemicals.
Most of the time, you just don't know where you're getting.
Yes,
Like, imagine a life where like people just order something online and they just assume that it's like what they're ordering.
yeah, uh,
Like,
the
would you order cocaine online,
I guess.
expecting not to be not to be laced with something
Yeah. No, exactly.
from a
Yeah,
random website and be like, oh yeah, this is 100%. Like,
yeah,
that's a very interesting place that we're in.
yeah. I find the cognitive dissonance with people not trusting pharmaceutical companies and then all of a sudden trusting, something they maybe bought off the dark web is it's an interesting like loop. Won't get into that. Uh, well, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been great to get your insight and experience and knowledge shared with the audience. You have a seminar coming up in Rotterdam. Do you have one in the UK as well?
No. So this is the reason I'm not doing one from the UK. Because I think there's like 15 people coming from the UK
Okay,
to Rotterdam.
nice.
And if I was to just announce I'm doing a UK seminar now, I'd have 15 angry people be like, well, I booked flights to Netherlands and all these things. Seminar, now you have one in the UK. Like, why'd you fist me? So I won't be doing a seminar in the UK because the response from UK crowd to fly a short flight to Netherlands was so good. March 14th and 15th, there's still some spots left for the second weekend in Rotterdam.
I'll put the links to all of that in the description of the episode. And best place to find you in YouTube, Instagram.
Just Instagram,
Okay,
Coach Baxter.
awesome. Cool. I'll leave all that in the description. So yeah, look, guys, I hope you did enjoy the episode of Kyle. If you did, make sure to leave a rating and review on the podcast platform you're listening on. I'll leave all Kyle stuff in the description, and we will chat in the next one.